I'm very pleased to welcome Christine Disch from Investor Relations, who will give you a short overview over the company itself, because it's doing much more than just climate change adaptation. And Professor Anusha Shah from Resillient Cities at Arcadis, and an expert in the field of climate change adaptation. And in fact, she has a wealth of experience in that field that this short introduction can't possibly do justice to. But just to give you a little taster there, apart from her work at Arcadis, she's also a non-executive director at the Met Office. She's a visiting professor at King's College in London, and she is a senior vice president at the Institution of Civil Engineers. So we're incredibly grateful that you found actually the time to come over here and be at our conference. And with that, over to Christine to give us a short overview on
I'm just going to use your lecture, if that's okay. Okay, thank you for that introduction, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to start with throwing some numbers at you. So this is the boring part, and then I'll leave it over to Anusha. So I'm the Investor Relations Director at Arcadis, and I just wanted to give you a glance of what Arcadis does and who we are, basically. So we are a leading consultancy company with a global footprint. We are basically 33,000 engineers. We don't have any assets, and we're not in construction, to already stop the first questions. We have a global footprint, so 350 offices in over 30 countries. And we're listed at the Euronext in Amsterdam. We typically do work for clients in infrastructure, environment, water, and buildings. And we have a whole range of solutions, which I won't be discussing right now, all of them, but I'll get to some of them. We use some centers where we basically offshore our work, where we have very skilled people, but this is also to make sure that we do it in a very efficient way, and that we use the data that we get from projects in an efficient way, and we call these Global Excellence Centers. So now moving to the next slide. Yes. I'll walk you through it in a quick way, I hope. So Arcadis provides our services solutions across all stages of natural and built asset lifecycle. So for example, if we start with a project, you have an acre of land. We can do master planning and the permitting of projects. That also includes, for example, environmental and social permitting, like we, for example, did for the HS2 here in the UK. We can model and monitor also the effects on biodiversity in case of developments of infrastructure or buildings. We haven't been doing biodiversity for the past 2 years or something. We've been doing biodiversity for the past 12 years. We provide design and engineering services to clients, and this can, for example, be the design of a building, a bridge, or a dike, or everything together. And we tend to do this in the most sustainable way as we can. So often use the BREEAM sustainability standards, or provide net zero buildings for our clients. But we can also design cycling lanes, like we did in Manhattan, that turn into little rivers once there will be floodings. So these are very smart solutions, I think. We also do product and cost management during the construction phases of assets. So during the operating phase of assets, we help private clients. For example, this can be automotive, pharmaceutical clients, or technology clients, that we provide with support on how to make their assets more efficient. You can imagine that bringing down energy and water usage of large data centers or manufacturing facilities can bring our clients significant savings. And lastly, the repurposing or refitting of assets. We advise large companies on how to deal with changing workplaces, but also large universities, for example, on refitting and making their buildings more energy efficient. We also do quite some work in soil and water remediation for large oil and gas clients and chemical clients, and we are very strong also in the PFAS removal. We have a lot of patented solutions in that field. So I can conclude, we offer, again, a wide range of design and engineering services. in a lot of different end markets, growing end markets. Sustainability is extremely important to us. It has been since we were founded in 1888. It's really ingrained in everything we do, and we'd like to also say that it's at the heart of everything we do. So it's not for us very difficult to be a sustainable company, since it is our business model. We aim to do this internally, obviously, but also and mostly through the work that we do with our clients. We, for example, currently are leading in the industry rankings, having a platinum status for EcoVadis and #1 in industry for Sustainalytics. And if we look at the work that we do for our clients, almost 80% of our project revenue aid the 5 SDGs that are most relevant to us. And furthermore, if we look at the offering that we have for clients, we're increasingly asked by our clients to support on advising climate adaptation, mitigation, or energy transition. The last 3 quarters have been extremely good for us. So we've seen accelerated growth and very strong margin development. The geopolitical environment, together with the climate change and uncertain supply chains, have only further increased the demand that our clients are looking for, and really want to decrease their dependency on expensive and fossil fuels with jittery price developments and supplies. So lastly, before we go into the climate adaptation and mitigation, I just want to give you an idea, after speaking about all the solutions, how our company is organized. So we're basically organized in resilience, places, and mobility. And we'll now be focusing on the climate and adaptation and mitigation stuff. But if you're interested in any other solutions or want to hear more about the company, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Okay. Thank you very much, Christine.
Welcome.
One quick question on the last slide. I see 41% resilience. I would very much assume that it's not 41% in climate change adaptation yet. Would you be able to put a sort of number on it, roughly, how much revenues you make in that field?
Well, if we look at how much we do for climate adaptation and mitigation specifically, within resilience, it would approximately be between 10 and 15%. But it is very much a growth market for us. We're currently in the process of developing a new 3-year strategy. And this is something that's extremely important to us. So I'm keen to see where it will go in, say, the next 5 to 10 years. So that's about it.
Which was kind of my second question. So this is essentially a part within Arcadis that is growing substantially above sort of the average revenue growth, which is more in the mid-single digits. That you wouldn't sort of, again, trying to coax numbers out of you, maybe give a number around that one?
Yeah, right now, so we have an organic growth target at the moment, which is, say, mid-single digits. You can go in different directions with that. That's why we took that one. But when we're seeing that growth, when we look at the growth and the demand, especially of the last year, and we're currently seeing 11% organic growth, we can't deny that there will be that accelerated growth pattern will likely continue. And if we talk about and look at all the growth markets in which we're in at the moment, we expect, that we will, at least for some of these markets, will be double digits at least.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Over to you, Anusha. You've just been at the COP27, and I just sort of thought it would be good to get a quick feedback from you, what you made of it, and whether there was any development that you might see as relevant for Arcadis.
Sure, thanks, Ben. Firstly, I want to say thank you for inviting me here. This is my first time with all the investors sitting here, and wonderful keynote speech by Gabriela. A lot of it, which I show on my slides to students, I was so pleased to see that on the screen. And thanks, Christine, for giving that introduction. So yes, I've just come back from COP, and it was just for the first time. Obviously, the last COP was in Glasgow, so it didn't seem as much as what was in Sharm el-Sheikh, where sometimes we are so UK focused, we forget that climate change is a global issue. And that really brought home just meeting people from diverse backgrounds, different countries, walking just into pavilions. it was so powerful to see that there are so many people from all walks of life just really gearing together for just one agenda, which is a climate resilient, sustainable and inclusive world. So that was quite powerful. I think, and Gabriella mentioned that, I happened to walk in one of the pavilions where the high ministerial discussions were happening on, where they were showing the film on Pakistan. And I loved the tagline, which said, if it happens in Pakistan, it will go out as well. You know, it won't just happen in Pakistan, it will happen outside as well. And it's not like what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. What happens in Pakistan happens outside as well. That was quite a catchy phrase, I thought, because that's the reality of it, is that the rest of the world is facing something, and that's what they said, that the GDP, you know, when the impacts of climate change are way too much than in the Western world, because it just, of course, the GDP gets impacted here, but that there it decimates the economy completely. And what they said was, which I really like, that it's, when we're talking about this loss and damage fund, which was a momentous thing that it was agreed, it's not charity, it's not human rights, it's climate justice. So that was quite powerful. So on a climate resilience point, I think it was a powerful message, but unfortunately on the mitigation side, not much moved from COP26, so which was quite disappointing.
And sort of taking a step back and back to Arcadis, it would be great if you could share a few examples with the audience about the type of climate change adaptation work and the different type of projects that you are involved in.
Sure, Ben, thanks. I think as Christine said, so basically Arcadis is a Dutch firm, so we've been doing kind of climate change for many, many years, but it's moved from flood risk management to building resilience now, because as you know, we've already crossed some of the tipping points, so we have not a choice but to be resilient. So I'll give you a couple of quick examples on flood resilience. So one of the projects we're doing is in New York City, East Coast Resilience Project. So this was after the superstorm Sandy, which you mentioned as well. It just grinded whole of New York to a standstill. And it really brought home the interconnected aspects of infrastructure and what can happen. So Arcadis was part of the consortium who actually, which is called the Big U, doing all the planning of what needs to be done, and that it's not just the government, it's a multi-sectoral participation needs to be done. And we also saw an example, interestingly, that one of the telecom companies who were helping Verizon on the telecom, they, because of 9/11 attack, they had kept all their infrastructure underground. And then when this flooding happened, they would just obviously, everything came to a grinding halt. So it's about, I think when you look at the big picture, it's about preparing for the unknown. So it's a different mindset. So we don't just give technical solutions, we're also looking at an integrated solution where we're actually helping change the mindset of the wider community as well. So although on the face of it, it might seem that Arcadis is a technical consultancy, but we're looking at the bigger picture and really working with other professionals as well. So that's one. So quickly, second, coming back home in London, we are working as main commercial partners and looking at the commercial side of things on Thames Estuary 2100 project. So that's a plan which is about managing the tidal flood risk in the Thames Estuary for the next 100 years. And it's a brilliant plan in terms of that it's one of the plans in the world which is looking at adaptive pathways approach, which is looking at, we don't have all the answers, we don't have all the data right now, but we are evolving the plan as the new scientific data comes in. And it's also like, obviously at the moment, London is defended by the Thames Barrier and 330 kilometers of flood defenses and embankments and the whole hydraulic structure. But this is not just the technical part of it. How do we make sure that the floodplains are resilient? And while we are working on flood defenses, how do we enhance biodiversity at the same time and look at the social side of things at the same time? So there's a lot on this project, so I don't think I'll be doing justice to it, just speaking very quickly. So that's on the flood risk side of things. Very quickly on, so obviously the climate change impacts are not just flooding, it's also where we don't want water to where we have less water, which is the water scarcity drought side, wildfires, and ecosystem restoration side. So on the water scarcity side, we are working with California and all these places where there is going to be, we know there's going to be water debt. So we're working with a lot of water companies to have those plans to how we make them resilient. But one particular example I can give is we're part of a 50-liter initiative which is with the World Business Council of Sustainable Development, World Economic Forum, and World Bank. And that's one of its kind public-private partnership, where the lessons were learned from Cape Town when they almost grinded to a halt on day 0. And we said, how do we get houses or homes to start thinking of 50 liters, 500 liter, but also look at the water energy carbon nexus, that you can mitigate carbon emissions through water efficiency. So that, for example, you can have integrated billing. You know, a housewife doesn't want to know how many, what kilowatt hour and how many liters of water. If we can make it very simple for consumers in terms of how many kettles of water they've used, how many washing cycles we have. So we're working with, this is the first time the engineers are working with multilateral agencies, with people like Procter & Gamble, Electrolux, who are making these appliances. So we're looking at the blind spot, which is the hot water. Because we always think heating is the biggest carbon emission factor in the homes, but what we don't know is the 24 hours hot water that is in our homes is the second emitter of carbon emissions. So making that link between water efficiency, energy pricing, obviously this is the right time thinking about the energy. How can we reduce water, reduce energy, and reduce carbon? So lots of examples to give on that.
You mentioned Thames Estuary, and I mean, that's close to home. So it might be worth maybe trying to dig a little bit deeper into this one. Just how did Arcadis get involved in this? And maybe you could give some sort of more examples on individual projects that you're working on within that.
Sure. So basically, Arcadis is doing the commercial management side of the project. So in this one, we are not doing the design and engineering side. So just wanted to make that clear. But personally, I have been involved in this project right from 2012. Because I was the technical lead for looking at other sources of flooding. So the point is that we are not just looking at the tidal river, we are also looking at groundwater flooding, we're also looking at the fluvial side of flooding, the pluvial side, which is the overland flow, because the infrastructure we have currently is the sewers were made in Victorian times, and they had the vision actually. They thought of how the population is going to be 4 times, and so far we've done really well, but now it's only reaching the end of its design life. So we're looking at what are the other sources of flooding, and what if in a scenario where you get a tidal surge, you get pluvial flooding, which is overland flow, and the water doesn't have anywhere to discharge. So how do you make it resilient against that? But in terms of the T2100, there is much more kind of the first 10 years of the projects was the Thames Estuary Asset Management within the Thames Estuary 2100, which is the 100-year. And that is looking at a program of asset management works, looking at identifying what the condition of the assets is, the tidal flood defences around London, what's the condition of the Thames barrier, where do we need to do the works, how long can the assets survive for, when do we need to replace it, so the T2100, the strategic one, keep doing a 5-year and a 10-year review as the new science comes, as we get more data on where the population size is going, how are the developments happening around London, so feeding that all into this. So the program of works is kind of, this Team 2100 is finishing in 2025. So we are now gearing up for the next 10 years. So because what has recently been revealed as per the data is the Thames barrier is being closed more frequently than was originally thought. The tidal flood defences need to be raised earlier than we earlier thought. And the condition of flood defences is going to worsen more than what we thought. So we have to adapt the plan. So we are also, obviously, as Arcadis, providing that advice, and we are wanting to gear up for the next tranche of this. And this time we want to be involved in the design side of things, knowing our expertise on this.
You're probably coming across quite a number of restrictions and red tape, or is that less the case?
We have to work with all this, isn't it? It's also our adaptation across the government and all these, navigating these channels. But having said that, the T2100 was DEFRA's, one of those projects which was a Pathfinder. It was called Pathfinder, so it was taken up differently than their normal flood risk management projects. So it had its funding guaranteed for the next 10 years. So this is a case where the model was created differently for this. And so the point is, when we can create different funding and operating models for the rest of the projects as well, where the government is really willing to do that extra bit.
Okay, and you mentioned funding, and that's kind of the next point I wanted to come to. Again, larger projects, somebody has to pay for it. How does it work with the funding? And maybe taking a step back from there, the overall policy support that's out there for helping sort of regional councils and so on to adapt to climate change. Is maybe you could comment a little bit about that one, how that
Sure.
works.
I mean, if I talk about the UK as such, so obviously DEFRA, through HM Treasury, DEFRA, we've got a 5.2 billion program for climate adaptation for Environment Agency. So DEFRA gives money to Environment Agency. So there's a program of works. But again, the way we are structured in the UK is Environment Agency looks at the major rivers, tidal flood risk and fluvial flood risk, but then you've got local authorities looking at the surface flood risk, surface water flood risk. So sometimes it can seem quite fragmented, and ultimately it's the water from where the water falls on the catchment to where it ends in the sea. So personally, one of my, what I kind of champion is I wish we had just one organization looking at it. For example, what you have in Singapore. We look at the water, the whole wastewater side of things. And yes, Singapore is a smaller country, but it's about how do we work together across the whole water cycle. So sometimes the policy can come in the way because even the 5.2 billion seems a lot, but looking at climate change, it's not enough. We need some private funding as well. So looking at the Thames Estuary 2100, the money is there, but it's not enough to do the whole work. So it's about how do we get private funding, that's called partnership funding in the language. So because ultimately, we have seen enough examples, and I think Gabriella showed us, it's not just about government. It's about all the assets, private and public assets. And if it's wiped out, everyone is going to be suffering. And Emma Howard-Boyd, who's the recent past chair of Environment Agency, was speaking at an event, and she said, it's almost like 650 billion pounds of infrastructure is at risk, both public and private, which is going to be designed, which is going to be planned, designed for till 2030. So we're looking at huge sums of money. So I think this is not a waiting game. It's about how does the private entities, how do they just kind of come into the equation and help the government? And we saw during COVID, Dyson came and designed those, what's it called? Ventilators. So when there's an emergency, private sector just
I'm not entirely
comes
sure
in.
whether he ever sold any, but anyway.
But what I'm saying is, when you want, the human ingenuity comes and you just roll your sleeves up and say, this is an emergency. And that's what the climate emergency is like. It's not, should we wait for the government, or a little bit here, a pocket there, and a pocket there. It's about how do we roll our sleeves up and collectively come out of this.
Do you see any interest from private clients to, if I think about a manufacturing facility which is in a floodplain and thinks, well, even if it's flooded, I would like to be protected. Things like that. Is there any work?
Lots of, we're getting approached by real estate agent firms and developers. So lots of projects happening. For example, in Bicester village here, we are doing the master planning for a new township, which is going to use a lot of blue-green infrastructure from solar roofs to sustainable urban drainage systems. We're working on that. In Netherlands, we've got one area where Arcadis are working for Bascalis, the contractors, where they've got a project there's a lake called Markerweer, in which when the dikes were built to protect the lands behind it, it created a stagnant pool of water. But then it was thought that how do we come up with multifunctional infrastructure, for example, nature-based solutions, how do we work with nature? So Arcadis was approached to do, look at, how do we give up, geomorphology expertise on that. So it's getting the mud and silt out of the lake and preparing these dunes. So there's like 5-6 archipelago islands, which are not just tourist attraction, they're so good for biodiversity as well. And plus they're protecting the mud flats. So, coming up with, when we talk about collaboration, it seems like everyone's talking about collaboration, but these are the collaborations actually happening on ground. And there are so many other examples. I wish I could give you the time because there are examples and there are lots of best practice which shows that each of the party, there is return on investment and it helps multiple parties. So the model is multifunctional infrastructure, multi-purpose, gives multiple benefits, multiple funding sources. That really works.
Okay. Obviously, climate change is a global problem, and Arcadis is a global company. How is it in emerging markets? How much work do you have over there?
Ben, really good question. I think, so one, we are really looking at the actual projects and working for governments in the climate adaptation world, in the, from a professional side. But what we have, which I'm really proud of, is we've been working with UN Habitat as a shelter program. So this is a more than a 10-year partnership. So this is not for profit. I mean, we give local expertise of engineers or scientists, our own people, and they are so keen to work on projects across like South America, India, subcontinent, Africa. And for example, there's a project in Senegal, which St. Louis, the city, was getting flooded again and again. We provided our coastal experts there, and they're working with the government and coming up with plans. So, there's so many projects on water management, eco-restoration, to water supply, to climate adaptation, but this is under the UN Habitat shelter programs. So this is where we are not getting profit, because Arcadis really believes in improving quality of life everywhere. So not for profit, but yet we are working on that.
Okay, very good. I'm starting to run out of time for my questions, and so many questions, so little time. I have one last one, and then I open up to the floor. On future trends, how do you see the adaptation market developing in terms of, do you see new technologies coming? I mean, we saw some very interesting technologies there being designed in Texas or being implemented. You mentioned nature-based solutions. Is there more development on that side? Maybe you could sort of speak a bit how you see these evolving.
Ben. So I think as with everything else, digital, whether it's data analytics, digital, IoT, big data, and all these technologies, I don't see them as solutions. They are the enablers, because we have the solutions. We just need that data. For example, I give you an example of, there's so many parties in the water cycle agenda. The very simple things, if they all used the same data, the same platform, things would be so much easier. You don't need so much funding. Everyone's looking at the same, satellite imageries, thinking together, looking at 3D visualization of how the flooding would occur, or heat risk, for example. This is where the rail ballast is buckling. This is where the tarmac is melting. Or on sides of highways, this is where we can have more biodiversity. If we can use digital tools across that to visually show us, would be really good. For example, in Arcadis, we've got a company now with us, which is Hydronet. And I'll tell you something which is happening currently. So I'm working on HS2 as a senior director for environmental consents. So we are looking for how do we get the environmental consents from environment agencies? So just yesterday, I had a chat with Hydronet, and I said, how do we visually present how this rail line is going to impact the water quality parameters? Rather than have Excel spreadsheets and writing emails to each other, how do we click on a button and it shows this is how the impact is going to be? So the role of technology is just limitless, to be honest. But there's so many things happening. If you go to a water tech conference, you will see how innovations are all there.
That's very good to hear.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. So any questions in the audience?
Thanks, that was really interesting. Just thinking about the nexus of the consultancies, the philanthropic organizations, the billionaires, and the government, and the universities. How do you see the new technologies, as Gabrielle was explaining, come into being? Because they've always been trickling along. There's always been odd people working in odd places, but it's never had the scale and the momentum to get out into, the big world.
So true. I couldn't agree more. We've always done pockets of good work, but we've never really joined up for a project. So I would say that it's still not happening so much. There is, you'll have an academic partner, you will have a consultancy, and you will have government, and we'll work together and do something on this scale. But it's not scaled up as much as we're needing. But I would say there are things which is quite pleasing to see. For example, the Ofwat, the regulator of water, they've come up with an innovation fund, and I've been judged quite a few times now. And they are really giving funding and millions of pounds for showing this partnership at scale. And they're saying the more partners you can bring, and each can play a role from academia, from research to implementation, we'll give you funding, but give us the results on ground. So that's happening now, but not fast enough is an honest answer. And very quickly, if we can have enterprise models, and we can have people like you, investors, financial people, and see the big picture of, from a farmer to a water utility company to an environment agency to government, and say, I don't know, Nestle, for example, just taking it, this, they need products, but they need pharma. If you can join the dots, we can get the answers. And as I said earlier, if we can have financial models that at the heart of it has multi-purpose and multi-benefit, and not be siloed, then we can have that. But I think we need help from everyone. So from this investor community, we need people to start having the faith and taking some risk. Because ultimately, if you don't take risk, you're not going to get the benefits. It's like any other model. So somewhere, if each of the party can take that risk, we can scale it up. So I don't know if that answers your question. It's just, we would want more of it, but it is happening in pockets.
Do you think about grassroots community action, not as opposed to, but to complement community governance more globally?
Oh, 100%. I think that's something, so I'm so glad you're asking that question, because one thing that we are really, really laying a stress on is the climate equity side of things. And I'm so pleased to say it was our younger engineers who formed a group within Arcadis, which is called the Climate Equity Group. And they're really kind of pushing us, all senior leaders, to say, we can't do it without the communities. So, and I'm a part of some community groups as well. In fact, in my local charity where I live in the Thames ward. So we can't do no matter how brilliant our technical solution is, if we don't get the communities on board. And I don't mean just consult them and engage them, have them on the table right from the day go. So there are so many projects where communities, that's what so we are moving the whole emphasis on just engaging and consulting communities to co-designing solutions on ground. So yes, that is happening. But more needs to happen. We need them on the table right from, even before when we have an idea of a project. So this is through my other non-exec roles, are really kind of championing the fact that we, post-COVID especially, I think the time has come when we have to ask communities what is the infrastructure they need, rather than tell them this is what you need and now we want to engage you, whether you're happy with our outline design. So it's like, what do you need? And also ultimately, just very quickly, I'll say before the Thames Barrier was built, there used to be flood drills in London. I think they need to come back, because it's not about alarming, it's about staying prepared. So if there's a double whammy or a triple whammy where you get a tidal surge, you get a fluvial flooding, and at least people are prepared. And they'll only be prepared if we have really strong community groups. Without them, the government can come to a grinding halt, we can have power breakdown. There's no way government is going to get mobilized then. So what would really help, and I've seen it in my personal experience on a couple of events, where what really works is communities watching out for each other. So yes, we need to start co-designing solutions.
In terms of Arcadis, for the company in particular, and for the industry in general, what's stopping you going faster, and what could be done about that? Is there a big picture answer to that?
Yeah, people. There are only so many engineers in the world at the moment. There's huge demand from all our clients, public clients, private clients. We don't even see the Infrastructure Act money being allocated or flowing yet. We don't even see a lot of the Green Deal money being allocated and flowing yet. So it is really getting people in, and we're good at that. We're still growing our FTE base, and also keeping people happy. So that is something that's really high on our list at the moment. Yeah, we have, tailored approach for each region to really understand what makes people tick and what makes them want to stay. And you see that per generation there are different drivers for that. So we try to really tailor our strategy. And then there is the use of digital sources, digital solutions, basically. So, yeah, getting the same result in a smaller amount of time. So, for example, if you use a digital twin when you want to optimize the water use from a pharmaceutical company, you can do it in, say, a few days instead of months. So that's where our global excellence centers also really come into play, because they serve as the data hub for projects that we do.
And quick follow-up to that then, if I may, which is just if there's a need for capacity building, there's not enough engineers, what can be done about that? And the other question is, do you find that the fact that you're working on climate is something that really helps you to retain people? I've heard from a lot of execs that they're actually, one of the reasons they shifted to a more overt climate strategy was to keep their people.
Yeah, to start with the latter one, yeah, you already know.
Yeah, I would say, Gabriella, absolutely. This is, we have seen a big surge of, especially youngsters, because as you know, youngsters are really interested to join companies with purpose now. So Arcadis has a very clear purpose. And I just want to say that the term engineer is much broader now. So it's infrastructure professionals. And we have also realized, and this is my other hat, Institution of Civil Engineers, that it's not just a civil engineer who's going to form a solution. It is, we need data scientists. We need people who are marketing specialists. We need people who are social scientists so that we can understand the behavioral changes and then implement the technical solutions. So I think what we are offering is that platform of all these different professionals to come together. In terms of blockers, I would say one of the blockers is getting the clients to act at that pace where we want to be as well. So it's educating the clients at the same time. And when you speak to the clients, they talk about policy. So, there are layers after layers. And the policy is the government. And ultimately, I would get a little political. It's about who you're selecting as your government as well. So it's all interrelated. But if we all have the same agenda, which is health and well-being, and we want to have nature recovery, we want to have all the stuff that you talked about, mitigation and adaptation, that we need to all push that agenda and ask the government to make the right policies. When they make the right policies, the clients have a driver, then we can help them get the operating models and financial models in place so that we can move the dial. And because this new mindset needs a different operating model. Because what we're trying at the moment is new ambitions with the current models, and it's a force fit. That's where we then get into a space where there's inefficiencies and we're not moving fast enough.
All right, excellent. Thank you so much again, Anusha and Christine. Thank you.